Welcome to the first lecture for our class about free will. We will start with some background about free will and determinism. And so the first question we should ask is, what do we even mean when we ask whether someone has or does not have free will? And so the most common way of characterizing what we mean by free will is somewhat indirect. It goes via our practice of holding people morally responsible. So we have this practice of holding people morally responsible. And to see what I mean, suppose you stand in a long line and you've been waiting for quite a long time, but then someone comes and just cuts into line right in front of you. And suppose it's very obvious that the person knew that there was a line, and suppose he also seems like a well-functioning adult who has control over their behavior. It then seems entirely appropriate to hold this person morally responsible and blame him for his behavior. It seems that the person deserves to be blamed for what he did. And that's what we mean by moral responsibility, the kind of responsibility you have for an action that can make it appropriate for you to be blamed if your action was bad and to be praised if your action was good. And we can then use moral responsibility to make more concrete what we mean by free will. Because it seems plausible that an agent is morally responsible for an action just in case if two conditions are met. First, she needs to have control over the action, so we wouldn't hold her responsible if she was forced to do it. And she must be aware of the moral significance of what she did. For example, if someone did something bad, but they didn't know that it was bad and had no way of finding out, then we also wouldn't hold them morally responsible. But if both conditions are met, it seems it's appropriate to hold someone morally responsible. And we can see that this first condition here concerns a certain kind of control over one's actions, whereas the second condition requires knowledge. And so the way of defining free will is then that free will just is whatever kind of control underwrites moral responsibility. So free will is the kind of control over your actions that can make you morally responsible. And this still doesn't tell us anything very much about what free will actually is or whether we have it, but it replaces a rather abstract philosophical question, what is free will, with a more specific question, namely what control underlies moral responsibility. And that question seems more tangible because we're all intimately familiar with the practice of holding people morally responsible, because if you're anything like me, you do it all the time. You're blaming other people for wronging you all the time. And so in this class, that's how we will approach the question. We will ask, what kind of control over your actions do you need? So it would be appropriate, given that the knowledge condition is met, to hold you morally responsible. And so the main puzzle about free will that philosophers have obsessed over is whether free will is compatible with determinism. And as Kadri Vivaline points out in the brief overview piece I ask you to read, is that there are many kinds of determinism. And for you to see more clearly why the kind of determinism that we are most interested in this class, namely nomological determinism, is a threat to free will, it's worth first looking at a different challenge to free will that arises from a different kind of determinism, namely logical determinism. And it's important to see why that kind of determinism is less challenging for free will. So this issue about logical determinism arises as follows. So Aristotle pointed out that intuitively every affirmative statement is either true or false. So if a statement says something about the world, then either that must be true or it must be false. And Aristotle observed that this must also be the case for statements about the future. For example, he took the statement, there will be a sea battle tomorrow. That statement must be either true or false, because according to Aristotle, it's a logical fact that all statements are either true or false. So that's a mere logical fact. But then, of course, once you've acknowledged this, that every future statement is either true or false, it's only a short step to seeing that this must also be true for statements about my future actions. So let's look at these 4 statements about my future. And suppose they happen to be all true. Suppose all these 4 statements are true. What then does this tell us about my freedom of will? So you might worry that if there already are all these truths about what I will eat, wear, and do at any given moment in my future, you may worry that then I don't possibly have any kind of choice what I will do in the future, since there are already truth about it, and so I cannot have free will. That's a challenge from logical determinism. But as it happens, while some people have been convinced by this reasoning, and we call them fatalists, most philosophers think that there's not really any kind of problem here. So logical determinism does not really rule out free will. And the reasons for thinking that is that statements about the future, such as Christian will get raspberry ice cream, are statements about what I will do. There are statements about what will happen. But free will concerns not what I will do, it concerns what I have control over, and so it concerns what I can do. The statement that I will get raspberry ice just doesn't rule out that I can do something different as well. And here's perhaps a way of making this a little bit more, a little bit easier to see. So raspberry ice cream is clearly the best ice cream there is. So every time I order ice cream, I always get raspberry ice cream. So that means that you can predict with complete certainty that every time I order ice cream, and it happens quite a lot, I order raspberry ice cream. So that's something that's true, and that's something you can know. But it just seems the mere fact that it's true that I will order raspberry ice cream just doesn't limit my choices at all. Even though that it's true that I will always order raspberry ice cream because it's the best ice cream, I still can do something else. I still could order vanilla ice cream. Nothing prevents me from doing so. It's just so that I never will. And so most philosophers think the mere fact that there are true statements about our future actions doesn't limit our control and doesn't rule out free will, because that still leaves it open that we also could do otherwise, although we will not. But there's a different kind of determinism that a lot of people think is a threat to free will, and that's nomological determinism. And from now on, whenever we talk about determinism, we mean nomological determinism. And nomological just means lawful in the sense of relating to the laws of nature. And nomological determinism, if true, is an empirical fact about the laws of nature. And by the laws of nature, we mean the kind of principles that govern how our world evolves over time and that physicists try to discover. There's lots to say about what laws of nature are, and we could have a whole other class about that, but we're not going to talk about that in any kind of detail. Okay, so that's the laws of nature. And so determinism, nomological determinism, says that the laws of nature have a certain form. In particular, if determinism is true, then the laws of nature are such that the complete state of the universe at any given time, together with the laws of nature, completely determines all future states. And there are several ways how we could spell out what completely determined means, and Vivolin talks about that. But one way of spelling it out is that if you have a complete description of the state of the universe at any given point in the past, and you have a complete statement of the laws of nature, then these two statements about the distant past and the laws of nature together entail all truth of the future. They determine a complete, accurate description of the complete state of the universe at any future time. And then say determine a complete description of the state of the universe at any future time, they also they also entail all of my future actions. And so why have people thought that this kind of determinism is a threat to free will? Well, it's because of reasoning such as the following one. So suppose determinism is true, and so the complete state of the universe in the distant past, before I was even born, together with the laws of nature, entail that I will eat raspberry ice cream tomorrow. Then it seems that for me to not eat raspberry ice cream, either the state of the universe in the distant past would have to be different, or the laws of nature would have to be different. So one of them has to be different, because if both are as they actually are, then they logically entail my action. But I have no control over the state of the universe before I was even born, because I simply wasn't there. And I have no control over the laws of nature, because they're not the kind of things that any human being has control over. But since these two things together entail my future action, it seems I have no control over my future action, because my future action just is the consequence of these two things, and I have no control over these two things. And so it seems that I never could do otherwise than I actually do, and I have no control over any kind of action. And that's how nomological determinism appears to threaten free will. And we will look at this argument in a lot more detail later, but for now just note that most people who think that free will is incompatible with determinism think so because of reasoning like the one I just gave you. And if you want to learn more about this kind of argument often goes under the name consequence argument. Okay, but for now that's enough about that. And so let us briefly look at what the world would be like if determinism were false. Excuse me. So there are several ways in which our world could fail to be deterministic. But the possibility most relevant to us is if the laws are probabilistic, and we will call such laws indeterministic laws. So indeterministic laws are such that the complete state of the world in the past, together with the laws of nature, only determines probabilities of future events. So indeterministic laws might be such that the complete state of the universe in the past, together with the laws of nature, only entail that there's a 90% chance I will eat raspberry ice cream and a 10% chance that I will eat vanilla ice cream. So me eating vanilla ice cream and acting otherwise than I in fact act is then logically compatible with the state of the universe in the past and the laws of nature. And note that a set of laws might be deterministic for some domains, but not for others. For example, you might have laws that completely determine that together with the distant past, completely determine everything that happens in the universe except for human actions, for which they only determine chances. And they might completely determine some human choices or actions, but only specify probabilities for some others. But as soon as you have laws that do not determine, together with the distant past, the entire history of the universe, so laws that leave open at least one thing for which they specify only chances, then we will call them indeterministic laws, because then determinism is false. And so let's end with introducing some terminology. So compatibilism is the view that free will is compatible with determinism. So it says that there's at least one world in which determinism is true and where someone has free will. Incompatibilism is the view that free will is incompatible with determinism. So it says that in every world where determinism is true, no one has free will because of the truth of determinism. And third, libertarianism is the view that two things are the case. First, it says that free will is incompatible with determinism, but it also says, second, that we do have free will. So libertarianism is committed to the idea that determinism is false in the actual world and that we have free will. And in this class, we will be mainly concerned with libertarianism, and in particular with one kind of libertarian theory, namely the theory defended by Christopher Franklin that he calls minimal event causal libertarianism. And we will say more about libertarianism and about Franklin's view in the second part of this lecture. See you then.